Davis, Okoye and George had finally found peace. After the chaos of the Rampage event, they now lived in a heavily secured wildlife sanctuary funded by the government. George, the massive albino gorilla, had adapted well to the new environment. The facility was built with state-of-the-art security, ensuring that George, along with Ralph, the mutated wolf, and Lizzie, the monstrous crocodile, could live undisturbed. Davis often found himself sitting by the large enclosure, watching George enjoy the quiet life. Their bond, forged through years of trust and survival, had only grown stronger. Despite everything, Davis knew deep down that George still had the instincts of a warrior. And on one fateful night, those instincts would be tested once again. It began with an unnatural hum that vibrated through the air, subtle at first, then growing into an overwhelming resonance that made Davis's bones ache. The animals in the sanctuary stirred restlessly, their instincts warning them of an unseen threat. Davis stood up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkened sky. Then it happened. A beam of green light split the sky, illuminating the sanctuary like a second Sunday. Davis shielded his eyes as an enormous spacecraft descended from the heavens, its sleek metallic surface reflecting the moonlight ominously. More ships followed, their presence casting an eerie glow over the landscape. George roared, his primal instincts kicking in as he recognized the danger. Ralph let out a guttural growl, his fur standing on end, while Lizzie thrashed in the water, sensing something was terribly wrong. From the belly of the ships, mechanical appendages shot out, their movements swift and calculated. They targeted the sanctuary's most powerful inhabitants: George, Ralph, and Lizzie. Davis sprinted toward George's enclosure, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no way to fight back against whatever this was, but he refused to stand by and watch. "George! Move!" Davis shouted, waving his arms to get his friend's attention. George, ever the protector, pounded his chest and lunged at one of the mechanical limbs, gripping it with immense strength. He roared in defiance, his muscles straining against the alien metal. For a moment, it seemed as though he might actually overpower it. Then, a pulse of blue energy erupted from the appendage, sending an electric shockwave through George's body. He howled in agony, his grip loosening. Davis felt his blood run cold. Ralph attempted to leap out of his enclosure, his powerful legs propelling him toward the nearest appendage, but before he could reach it, a force field materialized, slamming him back into the ground. He let out a pained snarl, struggling to rise as another appendage wrapped around his midsection, lifting him into the air. Lizzie, the most fearsome of them all, lashed out with her massive tail, shattering the enclosure walls in an attempt to escape. She managed to clamp her powerful jaws onto one of the metallic tendrils, crushing it with enough force to bend steel. But the invaders had anticipated her strength. Another limb extended, injecting her with a sedative that took effect almost instantly. Her body twitched violently before going limp. Davis ran forward, dodging debris as explosions erupted around him. The sanctuary's defenses were crumbling under the onslaught. He reached for George, his fingers brushing against the gorilla's fur just as another shockwave pulsed through the air. His body went numb, his vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before darkness took him was George's terrified eyes, filled with desperation, reaching for him as he was lifted into the night sky. Davis awoke to the sound of sirens and voices shouting in urgency. His head pounded, his limbs felt like lead, but none of that mattered. He sat up abruptly, scanning the ruined sanctuary. The enclosures were in shambles, scorch marks lined the ground, and the animals his friends were gone. Military vehicles surrounded the site, their flashing lights cutting through the smoke and dust. Soldiers moved methodically, securing the perimeter. At the center of it all stood General Arden Wallace, a seasoned military official known for keeping secrets buried. Davis forced himself to his feet, staggering toward the general. "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. Wallace barely spared him a glance. "There was an accident. A meteor strike caused a facility-wide blackout, leading to the loss of multiple assets." Davis clenched his fists. "Bullshit. I saw them. I saw those ships take them." Wallace's eyes were cold and unwavering. "Mr. Okoye, I suggest you drop this matter. There is no evidence of any ships. As far as the public is concerned, this was a tragic but natural disaster." Davis took a step closer, his rage barely contained. "You're covering this up. Why? Who took them?" Wallace didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, issuing orders to his subordinates. Davis felt a pair of firm hands grip his shoulders as two soldiers guided him away from the wreckage. But Davis wasn't done. As the sun rose over the devastated sanctuary, Davis stood amidst the ruins, his mind set on one thing: he was going to find them. George, Ralph, Lizzie. They were out there, somewhere. And if the government wasn't going to help, he'd find someone who would. With no other choice, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a long time. Dr. Kate Caldwell. If anyone could make sense of what had just happened, it was her. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Davis. We have a problem," he said grimly. "And I need your help." Kate was silent for a moment. Then, she simply replied, "Tell me everything." Davis Okoye sat in a dimly lit apartment of Dr. Kate Caldwell, his mind still reeling from the events of the previous night. His hands trembled slightly as he recounted the details: the alien ships, the abductions, the government cover-up. Kate listened intently, her eyes filled with both concern and curiosity. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her mind already working through the implications. "You're sure about what you saw?" she asked finally. Davis shot her a sharp look. "You think I'd make this up? They took George, Ralph, Lizzie. The government is trying to sweep it under the rug." Kate sighed, rubbing her temples. This is beyond anything I've ever dealt with. But if what you're saying is true, then we need proof." Davis exhaled heavily. "That's why I came to you. You've been studying unusual signals, right? Anything that could lead us to whoever took them." Kate hesitated before nodding. "Actually, yes. A few weeks ago, I picked up some strange signals coming from deep space. At first, I thought they were just cosmic noise, but now..." She turned to her computer, rapidly typing as she pulled up a complex frequency chart. "These signals don't match any known sources. And more importantly, last night, right after the attack, they stopped." Davis finished for her, his gut tightening. Kate nodded grimly. "Or changed." She zoomed in on the waveform, isolating a segment that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. Davis frowned. "What is that?" Kate turned to him, her face pale. "A message. And it's not random. It mentions a survival tournament. A competition where the strongest creatures from across the galaxy are forced to fight." Davis's heart pounded. "They took George, Ralph, and Lizzie, to make them fight." Kate nodded. "That's what it looks like. And if they are in this tournament, we don't have much time." Davis's jaw clenched. He had spent years protecting George, ensuring he had a life beyond violence. The thought of his friend being used as a gladiator for the entertainment of some alien audience made his blood boil. "We have to get to them," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Kate hesitated. Davis, this isn't like tracking a missing animal. We're talking about space travel. We don't even know where they were taken. Then we find someone who does. Davis knew they needed help, someone who could get them off-world. He had heard rumors of underground networks dealing in intergalactic smuggling. Dangerous, illegal, but if there was any chance of finding George, he had to take it. Kate sighed, already knowing there was no talking him out of this. I might know someone, she admitted. A contact in the black market. If anyone can get us off Earth, it's them. Then let's move. The neon-lit alley in the underbelly of the city reeked of damp metal and desperation. Davis and Kate walked cautiously toward a hidden entrance marked only by a glowing blue symbol. Kate knocked twice, paused, then knocked again in a specific pattern. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit den filled with alien technology and individuals from all walks of life. Humans, cyborgs, and creatures that didn't belong on Earth. At the center sat a broker known only as Lurk, a wiry man with cybernetic eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Dr. Caldwell, Lurk greeted, smirking. Didn't think I'd see you here again. What do you need? Kate took a deep breath. A ship. Away off this planet. Lurk chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Off-world travel isn't cheap. And it's dangerous. Where exactly are you hoping to go? Davis stepped forward. Wherever they took my friends. Lurk studied him for a long moment before grinning. I might have something. But you'll need a pilot. And I know just the person. He gestured toward the back of the room, where a tall figure stood watching. Her dark, metallic armor gleamed under the dim lights, and her piercing violet eyes locked onto Davis with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Zyra Vel'Korr, Lurk introduced. Ex-warrior of the Xygron Empire. She's seen what they do to prisoners of their tournament. And she hates them more than anyone. Zyra approached, her expression unreadable. You want to go after the Zygrons? Her voice was smooth, yet laced with danger. Davis nodded. They took my friends. I need to get them back. Zyra studied him for a moment before crossing her arms. Then let's get started. We don't have much time. Davis exhaled, determination burning in his chest. He was one step closer to finding George. No matter what lay ahead, he would not stop until he brought his friend home. The hum of the ship resonated through Davis's bones as he sat strapped into the co-pilot seat of Zyra's spacecraft. The cockpit was a sleek array of holographic panels and alien symbols that made no sense to him. Outside the reinforced glass canopy, the deep void of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant stars and nebulae shimmering with colors he had never seen before. It was overwhelming, breathtaking, and terrifying all at once. This your first time off-world? Zyra asked, her hands gliding effortlessly over the controls as the ship surged forward, leaving Earth behind. Yeah, Davis admitted, his grip tightening on the seat's armrests. Never thought I'd be doing this. Never thought I'd have to. Zyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. It's a big universe. Your problems are about to get a lot bigger. Davis wasn't sure if she meant it as encouragement or a warning, but he didn't care. He was here for one reason: to get George, Ralph, and Lizzie back. He wasn't about to let anything stop him. The ship moved through the hyperspace lane at impossible speeds, streaks of blue and white light rushing past them. Davis had no sense of time in this vast nothingness, but Zyra piloted with confidence, as if she had made this journey 1,000 times before. How far are we going? Davis asked. Zyra adjusted a dial. A few jumps. First stop, Galactic Station. It's a trading hub, a place where information flows faster than credits. I have a contact there, he might know where the Zygrons took your beasts. Davis exhaled, nodding. And if he doesn't? Then we find someone who does, she said simply. Galactic station was unlike anything Davis had ever seen. A massive floating city orbiting a dying star. Its sprawling metal architecture was illuminated by glowing neon signs in countless alien languages. Ships of all shapes and sizes docked and departed in a never-ending dance, while the streets below teemed with creatures from every corner of the galaxy. Davis and Zyra walked through the bustling marketplace, the air filled with the scent of exotic spices and burning fuel. Vendors shouted in alien tongues, trying to sell weapons, rare minerals, and unidentifiable food. Davis kept a hand close to his waist, feeling exposed in this chaotic new world. Stick close, Zyra murmured. This place isn't kind to outsiders. They entered a dimly lit cantina, the walls lined with flickering holographic displays. Zyra led them to a secluded booth, where a reptilian alien with cybernetic enhancements sat nursing a glowing blue drink. Cracks, Zyra greeted, sliding into the seat opposite him. I need information. Krex looked up, his slitted pupils narrowing. Vel'Korr. Been a while. What's it worth to you? Zyra tossed a small metallic cube onto the table. Krex picked it up, inspecting it before letting out a satisfied hiss. Encrypted data. Good. What do you need? Davis leaned forward. The Zygrons took my friends. They are forcing them into some kind of tournament. I need to know where. Krex exhaled, his forked tongue flicking out for a brief moment. The Tournament of the Void. It's held in a system beyond the Dead Nebula. Invitation only. The strongest creatures are taken and pitted against each other for the amusement of the galaxy's elite. Davis clenched his fists. How do we get there? Krex chuckled darkly. You don't? The Zygrons don't just let people waltz into their domain. The only way in is to be part of the games. Davis met Zyra's gaze. Then we find another way. Krex tilted his head. There is one. A man named Varek runs an underground fight circuit here on Galactic. Win a few matches, and you might earn a favor. Lose, and you'll be lucky to crawl away. Davis took a deep breath. Fighting was something he understood. Where do I sign up? The underground arena was nothing more than a repurposed cargo bay beneath the city's core. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and oil. A crude cage was constructed at the center, where two fighters were currently locked in brutal combat, cheered on by a crowd of alien spectators. Zyra and Davis approached a heavily scarred humanoid with metallic arms. Varek. You want in? Varek asked, sizing Davis up. Humans don't last long here. Davis cracked his knuckles. I'll take my chances. Varek grinned. All right. Win 3 fights, and we'll talk. Davis stepped into the cage, the crowd roaring as his opponent, a towering insectoid alien with razor-sharp limbs, skittered into the ring. The bell rang, and the fight began. The creature lunged, striking fast. Davis dodged, barely avoiding a lethal swipe. He countered with a powerful punch to the creature's midsection, feeling the impact rattle his bones. But the alien was tough. It hissed and came at him again. Davis fought smart, using his agility and strength to exploit the creature's weaknesses. He took hits, painful, bruising, but he didn't stop. With one final, earth-shattering blow, he sent the alien crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in cheers. 1 down. 2 more fights followed, each more brutal than the last. Davis pushed himself beyond his limits, his body screaming in protest. But he won. And when he finally stood victorious, bloodied but unbroken, Varek nodded in approval. "All right, human," he said. "Let's talk." Davis wiped the sweat from his brow. He had won his way into the conversation, but he had also painted a target on his back. The Zygrons would know someone was coming for them. And he didn't care. George could feel the cold energy bars of his containment cell buzzing against his fur, sending small jolts through his body whenever he moved too close. The prison was unlike anything he had ever seen, a massive, metallic dome with towering walls that shimmered with eerie blue light. The air was thick with an artificial scent, sterile and oppressive. He had been trapped here for what felt like days, though time had no meaning in this place. Across from him, in separate cells, were Ralph and Lizzie, their massive forms hunched and unmoving. The growls and roars of other creatures echoed throughout the chamber, a haunting symphony of imprisoned warriors. They had all been brought here for one reason: to fight. A deep, guttural voice crackled through the intercom above, speaking in a language George didn't understand. Moments later, a translator drone descended, its glowing red eye scanning the prisoners. Then, in a cold, mechanical voice, it announced in English, "Welcome to the Xygron Colosseum. You have been chosen to compete in the Tournament of the Void. Fight. Survive. Entertain. Those who disobey will be erased." George let out a defiant roar, slamming his fists against the barrier, but the electric shock sent him stumbling back. He would not be controlled. He would not become a weapon. But the prison was designed to break them, to strip them of their will. High above, overlooking the arena, a figure watched with amusement. General Vordak, the ruthless commander of the Xygron Empire, leaned forward on his throne-like seat. His reptilian face twisted into a grin as he observed the captured creatures. "These earth beasts are strong," Vordak mused. "But they lack discipline. We shall fix that." Beside him, a scientist in a sleek, silver uniform nodded. "The neural reprogramming process has already begun. The larger one, George, is resisting, but the others are responding well to the conditioning. In time, they will forget their past and embrace their new purpose." Vordak's grin widened. "Then let us begin." Inside his cell, George felt a sharp pain shoot through his skull. Images flooded his mind, memories of Davis, of their bond, of their battles. But with each wave of energy pulsing from the ceiling, those memories blurred, distorted, then faded. He shook his head violently, fighting against the intrusion. He couldn't forget. He wouldn't forget. Across from him, Ralph let out a low growl. His eyes, once filled with wild intelligence, now flickered with something darker. A mindless rage. Lizzie, too, seemed different, her movements slower, her eyes empty. George gritted his teeth. He couldn't let this happen to them. With a final, desperate roar, he slammed his fists together and charged at the energy barrier. The shock was unbearable, but he pushed through the pain, his muscles straining, his vision going white. The energy flared wildly, alarms blaring through the prison complex. From above, Vordak narrowed his eyes. "Impressive," he muttered. "But futile." With a wave of his hand, the cell's containment field intensified, sending George crashing to the ground, his body convulsing from the force of the blast. Darkness crept at the edges of his vision. He could hear Ralph's ragged breathing, Lizzie's heavy exhale. And then, silence. In the medical bay of the Colosseum, the Xygron scientists prepared for the next phase. George was restrained on a metallic slab, his massive arms shackled by glowing cuffs. A hovering drone injected a shimmering fluid into his neck, designed to suppress his free will. But deep inside, a flicker of resistance remained. As the drug spread through his veins, a single memory surfaced a moment from long ago. Davis, standing beside him, hand outstretched, eyes full of trust. A bond stronger than any force in the universe. And George knew, no matter what they did to him, he would never stop fighting. Davis and Zyra crouched in the shadows of a towering scrapyard on the outskirts of the Xygron Colosseum. The grand structure loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and energy barriers, its jagged architecture illuminated by the blood-red glow of alien torches. The sounds of roaring crowds and distant combat echoed through the thick, smog-filled air. "This is madness," Davis muttered, watching heavily armed guards patrol the perimeter. "There's no way we can just sneak in there." Zyra smirked, tightening the straps of her combat armor. "That's why we're not sneaking in. You're going to fight." Davis exhaled sharply. He knew this was the only way. The Tournament of the Void wasn't just a deathmatch, it was a spectacle, and winning matches would bring him closer to the arena's inner sanctum, where George, Ralph, and Lizzie were being held. They had already forged false identities. Zyra had connections in the underground market, bribing a black market official to register Davis as a last-minute contestant under the name Earthborn. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get him inside. With a final glance at the Colosseum, Davis straightened. "All right. Let's do this." The underground entrance to the competitor quarters was a stark contrast to the grandiose battlefield above. The walls were made of crude metal, patched together from salvaged shipwrecks, and the air smelled of sweat and blood. Alien fighters of all shapes and sizes loitered in the waiting area, sharpening weapons, growling threats, or simply sitting in eerie silence, meditating before their battles. Davis tried to look unimpressed, but his instincts screamed at him to be ready for anything. A bulky, four-armed guard stepped forward, scanning Davis with a handheld device. The scanner beeped, confirming his forged identity. The guard grunted and tossed a metallic bracelet at Davis. "You survive, you move up. You die, you get recycled. Understand?" Davis clenched the bracelet in his fist and nodded. A loud buzzer sounded, and the fighters turned toward a massive gate. A voice boomed from unseen speakers, announcing the next match. Next combatant, Earthborn. Davis felt his stomach tighten, but he forced himself to step forward. As the gate groaned open, revealing the blinding lights of the arena, the roar of the crowd crashed over him like a tidal wave. Thousands of spectators, aliens, cyborgs, creatures he couldn't even begin to describe, filled the Colosseum stands, chanting for blood. Across the arena, a massive silhouette emerged from another gate. His first opponent. The creature was at least 10 feet tall, with thick, stone-like skin and glowing yellow eyes. It carried a battle axe the size of a car door, its serrated edge still dripping with the remains of its last opponent. Davis rolled his shoulders, trying to push past a doubt gnawing at him. This wasn't just about survival, this was about George. About getting him back. The announcer's voice thundered over the stadium. "Begin." The alien warrior charged with terrifying speed, raising its axe high. Davis barely had time to roll to the side, feeling the wind from the blade as it crashed into the ground, sending up a cloud of dust and shattered stone. Davis sprang to his feet and delivered a sharp kick to the creature's side, but it was like hitting a brick wall. The alien barely flinched before swinging its massive fist. Davis ducked just in time, countering with a quick jab to its knee. This time, the alien stumbled. He had found a weak spot. Davis ducked and weaved, landing precise blows to the alien's joints, forcing it to stagger. But he knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. One mistake, and he was done. As the alien roared in frustration, Davis spotted an opening. He feinted left, then lunged forward, using all his strength to drive his fist into the creature's throat. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the alien's eyes bulged as it stumbled backward, choking. Davis didn't hesitate. He spun and delivered a brutal roundhouse kick to the side of its head. The giant collapsed with a ground-shaking thud. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Colosseum erupted into deafening cheers. Davis stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily. He had won. But more importantly, he had just gotten Vordik's attention. High above, in the observation chamber, General Vordik leaned forward in his seat, watching Davis with newfound interest. Interesting, he mused. This one might be worth keeping an eye on. Davis stood in the center of the colossal arena, his breath ragged and his muscles aching from his previous battles. The crowd's deafening roar filled his ears, but his focus was locked on the massive reinforced gate at the far end. He had fought his way to this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to emerge. The gate trembled as it began to rise, revealing a towering silhouette behind it. The stadium lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. Then, with a ground-shaking step, George emerged. Davis felt his chest tighten. His friend, the gentle giant he had raised and protected, was now a monstrous version of himself. George's white fur was matted with battle scars, his eyes devoid of warmth, replaced by a cold, alien glow. Heavy restraints adorned his limbs, pulsating with an eerie red energy. Davis clenched his fists. "George," Davis called out, his voice barely audible over the crowd's excitement. He took a step forward, hoping for any sign of recognition. "It's me, buddy." George's only response was a guttural snarl. Then, without warning, he lunged. Davis barely had time to react as the massive gorilla swung a clawed hand toward him. He dove to the side, rolling across the dusty battlefield. The force of the impact left a crater where he had been standing moments ago. "This isn't you?" Davis shouted, dodging another earth-shattering strike. "They did something to you, George. Fight it." George's movements were relentless, calculated. The once playful intelligence in his eyes was gone, replaced by an unwavering drive to destroy. Davis gritted his teeth. This wasn't just a fight, this was a test. Vordik wanted to see if Davis was strong enough to be more than just a competitor. The next attack came faster than Davis expected. George's massive fist caught him in the ribs, sending him flying across the arena. Pain erupted in his side as he skidded to a stop, coughing up dust. The crowd roared in approval. Davis groaned, forcing himself to his feet. He could barely breathe, but he couldn't stop now. "Come on, big guy. Remember who you are." George charged again, and this time, Davis didn't dodge. Instead, he stood his ground and, at the last second, sidestepped, reaching out to touch George's arm. "You remember me," he urged. "You have to." For a fraction of a second, George hesitated. Davis saw the flicker of confusion in his friend's eyes. It was buried deep beneath layers of conditioning, but it was there. Hope surged through him. "That's it. It's me, buddy. It's Davis." But then, the restraints on George's limbs pulsed, sending a jolt of red energy through his body. He let out an agonized roar, clutching his head. Whatever control Vordik had placed on him tightened its grip, erasing the hesitation. George slammed his fists into the ground, sending shockwaves through the arena. Davis was thrown off balance, barely managing to avoid the follow-up attack. He needed a new plan fast. High above the battlefield, in the VIP chamber, General Vordik observed the fight with interest. "Fascinating," he mused, his metallic fingers stapled together. Even under complete neural reconditioning, the beast hesitates. This human he is an anomaly. Beside him, a Xygron scientist nodded. Shall we increase the control frequency? Vord considered it for a moment, then shook his head. No. Let's see how far the human will go. Back in the arena, Davis was running out of time. He dodged another devastating blow, his mind racing. He couldn't defeat George not without killing him. And that was never an option. Then, an idea struck him. Davis let George corner him against the arena wall. The gorilla loomed over him, muscles tensed for the final blow. The crowd screamed in anticipation. Come on, George, Davis whispered. You have to wake up. He dropped his guard. George's fist came down only to stop inches from Davis's face. The arena fell silent. Davis looked up, meeting George's eyes. The red glow flickered. George's hand trembled. Then, the gorilla let out a pained, guttural groan, stumbling backward. His massive form shuddered as the red energy restraints pulsed erratically. Davis took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding. That's it, buddy. Fight it. Above, Vordic's expression darkened. Enough. The scientist beside him pressed a button, and George let out an ear-splitting roar as the restraints sent a final, brutal shock through his body. He collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. Davis felt rage boil inside him. You bastards! Before he could react, guards stormed the arena. Stun weapons crackled to life as they surrounded him. Davis clenched his fists, ready for another fight. But before he could make a move, something unexpected happened. George lifted his head. And for the first time since the fight began, his eyes locked onto Davis as not with violence, but with recognition. Then, chaos erupted. Davis lay on the cold, metallic floor of the Xygron arena, his body battered and bruised. His breaths came in ragged gasps, blood dripping from a deep gash on his forehead. Every muscle screamed in agony, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Above him, George loomed, his massive frame casting a shadow over Davis. The once gentle giant now bore a twisted snarl, his eyes filled with the artificial rage that Xygron's conditioning had instilled in him. George let out a thunderous roar, his powerful fist tightening, ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. Davis, barely able to lift his arms, did the only thing he could. He raised his hand in a familiar way he had always done when training George back on Earth. Palm up, fingers slightly curled, a gesture that had always meant trust. For a split second, George hesitated. Something deep within the albino gorilla stirred. A flicker of recognition. His snarl faltered, and his breath hitched. His mind was a battlefield of forced obedience and long-buried memories. A painful growl escaped his throat as fragmented images rushed back to him of the days spent with Davis in the wildlife sanctuary, of playful chases and late-night conversations in sign language. Davis saw the flicker in George's eyes and seized his chance. Summoning the last of his strength, he rasped, "George, it's me. Remember." George staggered back, clutching his head, his roars turning into pained howls. The Xygron implants were trying to suppress his memories, but the floodgates had been opened. Every moment he had spent with Davis fought against the artificial programming that sought to erase them. From the observation deck, General Vortex slammed his fist against the control panel. No. Increase the neural dampeners. He must not regain control. Technicians scrambled to adjust the settings, but it was too late. George let out an earth-shattering roar, his body convulsing as the neural implants sparked violently. His eyes widened as the fog of manipulation lifted, clarity returning to his gaze. His heavy breath slowed, and he turned to look at Davis. Really look at him. Recognition dawned. "George, you're back," Davis whispered, relief washing over him. George let out a softer, guttural sound, almost like an apology. He reached out a massive hand and, with the gentleness that had once defined him, helped Davis to his feet. But the battle was far from over. Across the arena, Ralph and Lizzie remained under Xygron's control, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Ralph's fur bristled as he snarled, his talons scraping against the ground, ready to strike. Lizzie, the reptilian behemoth, let out a deep, guttural hiss, her massive tail thrashing violently. Davis barely had time to register what was happening before Ralph lunged, his claws aiming straight for George's chest. But this time, George was ready. With newfound clarity, he sidestepped the attack and countered with a powerful backhand, sending Ralph tumbling across the arena. Lizzie, however, was a different threat entirely. She lunged, jaws snapping. Davis and George barely dodged in time as her teeth sank into the ground where they had just stood. The force of her bite sent debris flying in all directions. Davis clenched his fists, knowing he couldn't fight them alone. George was back, but Ralph and Lizzie were still enslaved. And as long as Vortic controlled them, the danger wasn't over. High above, Vortic sneered. "Fine. Let the traitor fall with the rest of them." He turned to his guards. "Release the sentinels. Let's see how long they last." The arena gates groaned open once more, and from the darkness emerged towering mechanical warriors, their crimson optics locking onto Davis and George. The battle had only just begun. The air in the Xygron Colosseum was thick with the scent of blood and burning metal. Chaos had erupted. Davis, battered but unyielding, stood beside George, their breaths heavy as they surveyed the battlefield. The uprising had begun. A deafening explosion rocked the underground chambers as the first wave of liberated fighters stormed through the security barriers. Zyra, dual plasma blades in hand, led the charge with the precision of a warrior who had lived for nothing but battle. Sparks flew as she cut through Xygron guards with ruthless efficiency, her eyes locked on one goal, General Vortic. Meanwhile, Davis and George moved through the Colosseum's holding cells, breaking open containment fields and releasing creatures from across the galaxy. Some were wild and frenzied, others weak from captivity, but all shared a common hatred for their captors. The rebellion swelled in numbers, and the arena, once a stage for forced bloodshed, became a war zone. Ralph and Lizzie, however, remained unchained but unfree. The neural implants still burned in their minds, keeping them enslaved to Xygron's will. Davis knew they wouldn't stop until the control was broken, but the only way to do that was to force them to remember who they really were. "George," Davis panted, gripping his friend's massive arm, "we have to reach them." George rumbled in agreement before charging toward Ralph, dodging a deadly swipe from the mutated wolf's razor-sharp claws. With one powerful leap, George tackled Ralph, pinning him to the ground. But Ralph fought back viciously, snapping at George's face with unnatural fury. Davis took a deep breath, dodging a tail swipe from Lizzie as she tore through a group of guards. He had to do this now. "Ralph!" "Lizzie!" "It's me, Davis," he shouted, barely dodging another strike. "You're not their weapons. You're not killers. You're family." Ralph hesitated for just a fraction of a second, his glowing eyes flickering between blind rage and confusion. George took the opportunity to press his forehead against Ralph's, just like they used to do back on Earth. A guttural growl of pain escaped Ralph's throat as his mind wrestled against the control. Lizzie, still under the influence, coiled her massive tail around Davis, squeezing with crushing force. He gasped for air, his ribs threatening to snap under the pressure. But he refused to give up. He reached out, his hand brushing against Lizzie's rough scales. "Lizzie. I know you're in there." The reptilian behemoth hesitated. For the first time, her movements slowed. The Xygron control pulsed violently through her, trying to drown out her past, but Davis saw the recognition in her reptilian eyes. Then, a deafening roar, one of pain and clarity. Ralph and Lizzie convulsed, their neural implants sparking wildly before short-circuiting. Ralph let out a pain howl before shaking himself free from George's grasp, his breathing heavy, but his eyes were his own again. Lizzie uncoiled from Davis and backed away, shaking her massive head as if ridding herself of a terrible nightmare. They were free. Above the battlefield, Zyra's duel with Vortic raged on. The Xygron general was a formidable opponent, wielding an energy whip that crackled with lethal intensity. He struck with precision, but Zyra was faster. Ducking under his attacks, she countered with swift, calculated slashes. Sparks flew as her blades clashed against his armor, each strike bringing her closer to victory. Vortic sneered, pushing back against Zyra with a sudden forceful blow. "You fight well," he growled, "but this rebellion will die just like the rest." Zyra grinned, blood dripping from a cut on her lip. "That's where you're wrong." As if on cue, a monstrous roar echoed through the Colosseum. George, Ralph, and Lizzie stood together, united once more. The sight sent a wave of terror through the remaining Xygron forces. The tide of battle had turned. Davis turned to his allies. "We end this now." With their strength combined, they charged forward, leading the rebellion in a final push to take the Colosseum. Vortic's forces scrambled, their once unbreakable stronghold crumbling under the weight of the uprising. The war for freedom was just beginning. Davis stood amidst the wreckage of the Xygron arena, his breath ragged, his body covered in bruises and cuts. Around him, the battlefield was littered with fallen soldiers and shattered machines. The rebellion had succeeded. General Vortic lay motionless, his once imposing figure now a crumpled heap beneath the rubble of his own empire. George, Ralph, and Lizzie loomed behind Davis, their massive forms casting long shadows over the ruins. Their eyes, now free of Xygron's control, reflected exhaustion but also triumph. Zyra approached, her energy blade dripping with the lifeblood of those who had stood in her way. She nodded at Davis, a silent acknowledgement of their victory. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Xygron capital was crumbling. Explosions rocked the foundations of the city as the control systems that had once enslaved countless creatures now collapsed. Sirens wailed, and the sky was painted with the orange glow of fire and destruction. The time to escape was now. "We need to get out of here," Zyra shouted, pointing towards a docking bay where alien ships were stationed. "Once the reactor core detonates, this place will be nothing but space dust." Davis turned to George. "You with me, buddy?" George let out a low grunt and pounded his chest in affirmation. Ralph and Lizzie, still shaken but regaining their instincts, followed suit. The bond between them had not been broken. They sprinted toward the docking bay, dodging falling debris and stray blasts from collapsing structures. The ground trembled beneath them as shockwaves from the failing power core sent cracks racing through the city streets. Reaching the hangar, Zyra quickly hacked into the control panel of a sleek, black Xygron warship. "Get in," she commanded as the ship's ramp lowered. Davis ushered the creatures inside, George helping Ralph and Lizzie as they squeezed into the oversized cargo bay. As soon as they were secured, Zyra launched the ship into the sky, the engines roaring as they pierced through the atmosphere. Below, the Xygron capital imploded, vanishing into a fiery abyss. The once mighty empire was no more. As the ship steadied in the cold vastness of space, Davis finally allowed himself to breathe. He turned to George, placing a hand on the gorilla's massive shoulder. "We made it." George responded with a familiar, playful grunt, as if to say, "Of course we did." Zyra smirked as she adjusted the ship's navigation. "Now what, Earthman? Back to your little blue planet." Davis exhaled, staring out into the stars. "Yeah, back home." The journey back to Earth was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. As they entered Earth's orbit, the sight of the planet's blues and greens was a welcome relief. Touching down in a remote location, far from prying eyes, Davis and his companions disembarked. Ralph and Lizzie, still adjusting to their newfound freedom, wandered cautiously, sniffing the air. George, however, stood by Davis, his ever-loyal guardian. "What now?" Zyra asked, arms crossed. Davis glanced at his friends, then up at the sky. "We rebuild. We rest. But I have a feeling this isn't over." Just as the words left his lips, a beeping sound echoed from the ship's communication system. Zyra's eyes narrowed as she checked the console. A transmission was coming through a faint, cryptic signal from deep space. Davis stepped forward, listening intently. The message was clear, a new threat was coming. George let out a low growl, sensing the shift in the air. Ralph and Lizzie turned their heads toward the sky, as if they, too, could feel it. Davis clenched his fists. "Looks like the universe isn't done with us yet." As the screen flickered with alien symbols, the scene faded to black, leaving only the ominous hum of the transmission resonating through the air.